For this week's podcast episode on Lovefly, we welcome Trisha Ferguson, who I had the honour of meeting and working with on the recent IATA conference in Marrakesh, which was fantastic. And she is an awesome speaker. You are an awesome speaker. And actually, I learned quite a few tips from watching you speak, from the way that you start, because you were the opening speaker, and I just thought, oh, it was amazing. So there's a couple of things that I've personally learned from watching you speak. And I've been doing this a long time, so I thought we should do it. But seated building. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Paul. I was thinking this morning that when Paul calls, you answer. When he rings you up, you pick up the phone, right?
Only that was so.
And your kind words are very humbling, and it was such an absolute pleasure to spend, time in the months leading up to our presentation with you and getting to know the Lovefly community and what you're doing. That's so wonderful. And having that opportunity to present with you was just super fun and great.
Oh, well, likewise. Thank you. Well, okay. That's enough of that, eh? So, Trisha, tell the humans listening and watching the cool job or vocation or passion. I think I put it in the passion stroke vocation that you currently and have for a while been holding.
It is quite a story, and I'm honored and humbled to share it. I am the CEO of the Interaction Group, and we are the largest designer and supplier of passenger safety briefing cards in the world.
Yeah.
The Interaction Group has been partnering with carriers of all sizes all over the world to educate and prepare passengers should there be an accident and or an incident on board the flight. So those passenger safety briefing cards that you pick up and you read to learn about the specifics of your aircraft, those are what we have been designing, testing, studying, and producing for 52, 53 years at this point. Yep. And I have been with the company 29 years on December 13th. I started working for the company as a 19-year-old college student who was on a music scholarship, which is a random,
Yeah.
Yep, random, stat. But I was a college student who was on a scholarship that needed to eat food and couldn't afford it. So I got a part-time job working for the company. And I was the individual who would process invoices and sometimes answer the phone and do some bookkeeping. I absolutely fell in love with aviation, which I'm sure your audience has heard so many people say. Really, the joke is once you're in aviation, you really can't get back or can't get out. And if you try to get out, you always come back. So I fell in love with aviation. I fell in love with doing business worldwide, changed my major to international business for my undergraduate degree and communications. Graduated with my undergraduate, went on with my graduate degree in human factors, ergonomics, and psychology, studying why we as humans respond to environments and equipment. And I had a really pivotal moment in making that decision to change my majors in the course of my life was the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, which was a flight that was hijacked. And it was on November 23rd, 1996. And again, at that point, I was 20 and trying to really kind of figure out what was next. And I woke up that morning to watching our morning news show and learned of the hijacking in which many people lost their lives and many people survived that day. And it was an aircraft that landed in the water, what we call in the aviation industry a ditching. And on that morning news show, they were interviewing a few of the passengers that survived. And those passengers said very clearly, the reason I survived this accident is because I read my safety card. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to inflate my vest, my life jacket, until I got outside of the aircraft. And those are the individuals who survived that accident. And those were our cars on that aircraft at that time. And it was a really pivotal moment for me where I realized that not only what we were doing was really important, but it was life changing and life saving. And so I took over ownership of the company in 2001 as a really young woman who had a ton of energy. And I wish I had some of that back, Paul. But that's really who we are, and that's what we do. We were the very first company in the 1960s, to produce and passenger safety briefing cards that were illustrated and tested. We were the very first company to ever do a passenger safety briefing video, which is a whole nother story. But that's who we are. That's what we do, and I love it. Paul, I think I lost audio on you.
What's happened?
Oh, because it was on your jacket. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. I could have said something really wise along the way there, and it's just lost forever.
You probably did.
I doubt it. So first question then, what was it about aviation that hooked you so quickly?
I think one of the big things was that it every day, every phone call took me around the world. So as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old who had traveled just a little bit, it really introduced me to different cultures, different communities, different kind of human behavior. And that was really intriguing and exciting to me at the time. It also gave me the opportunity, being a part of different organizations and regulatory agencies, to go all over the world and explore. And that piece was exciting to me in my 20s. It's still exciting to me in my 40s. So I think that was really the initial pull to it. And ultimately, what has kept me is the importance of the product that we make and the integrity of that product. And also the aviation community, the partners that I get to work with really become friends and family in a way. And so those are the main reasons. Yeah.
They're good. That's a good start. Okay. So what about the CEO decision? Let's be honest, that's no small thing, is it? You've been there a few years by then. So I was just trying to do the maths. I was thinking it might have been 5 or 6 years, and then you've stepped into it. I mean, that's a massive step up. And how did that all happen? What made that? Do you know what I mean? Because people will sit and think about things, and I'd love to, the dot dot dot, and never do it, and you did.
I think I was really born with a pretty innovative, disciplined, and determined personality. So when I got into the environment of this organization and my heart became attached to it, I all of a sudden started to have vision for what the future could be in the organization. And I was really lucky to be mentored by the founders of the company. So they built the company in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And I came at a really good time when they were really open to mentoring someone.
Right.
I give Dr. Daniel Johnson a lot of credit for taking a young female and being willing to pour into someone who had a lot of energy and a lot of determination. And so, this sounds like a really weird comparison, but I liken being a business owner to being a creative person as well. As a musician in my my other life, and I still am a musician today, and so it's similar. There is creativity and artistic sides of your brain in music and art as there is in business with innovation and creativity as well.
Yeah.
So it worked really well. And, the interesting thing about the mid 90s and late 90s and early 2000s is, especially in the aviation industry, it was a really male dominated environment back then. And I would often be the only female in the room, so to speak. And certainly if I wasn't the only female, certainly the youngest.
Right.
And so I give our founders a lot of credit for maybe changing some tides in that way of bringing, a woman to the table and mentoring me. And it has been such a ride. There's really no other way to describe entrepreneurism and ownership. It's a ride, and it's got lots of ups and lots of downs, but so worth it.
Yeah.
So worth it.
Well, so before you took over them, why did the founders start? What made them do that?
Yeah, great question.
Is it?
They were,
Thanks.
yeah, well, credit due is where credit is. The founders were human factors psychologists and ergonomic psychologists themselves. They both have their doctorates, and they were working at Douglas Aircraft at the time. And Douglas Aircraft became McDonnell Douglas and then eventually was bought out by Boeing.
Yep.
Was in Long Beach, California. They were hired as young human factor psychologists to study why so many passengers were not surviving accidents. When you hear me reference incidents or accidents, the difference between an incident and an accident is loss of life. So there were many crashes as the aviation industry was learning and growing and developing. And there was so much loss of life that they were trying to establish why that was happening. So these two individuals studied every accident and every incident for decades upon decades. And at that time, interviewing crash survivors, we have thousands of archives of interviews of crash survivors on their experience, what happened, how they responded, how the people around them responded. And all of that data really pointed to passengers were not educated on how to operate the equipment around them. And back then, what safety cards looked like were multi-page documents, 95% text, using languaging and terms that were really only known internally in the aviation industry. Very difficult to understand. So you have comprehension barriers, you have language barriers, you have environmental barriers that were keeping passengers from really being educated on how to open a door, how to put a life jacket on, where they might be stowed. So what they discovered was that over 90% of the accidents at that time, that passengers were surviving impact. They were surviving the impact of the accident, but they were not surviving. They weren't getting out of the aircraft.
Oh my goodness! So I just had to think then, as you said, those figures. That's pretty shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you think that's it, and then that's very sad.
It is very sad. And it was also that data spoke to a huge opportunity on how to make a shift in the industry to make flying so much safer. Which is, if we can educate the passenger, we can increase survivability incredibly. So that data drove them with Douglas Aircraft at the time to kind of create and start the movement towards creating effective safety cards that are understandable. And that led to the late 60s. It took about 3 to 4 years to develop the first safety card that was, at that time, 90+% illustrated, which was very different.
Yes.
On how to use the equipment, how to get yourself out of the aircraft, what to do in certain scenarios. That piece was created for Western Airlines back in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was the DC-10s were really like the aircraft back then. So a lot of DC-10s had kind of innovative new safety cards on them. And those cards became kind of the shell or the standard of which they started to become even more and more and more effective as they were tested and on the novice flyers, right? So that's really, to this day, we still test our safety cards for understandability, for new illustrations, for different sequences. We're, as a team, we're in fact doing one right now for the largest airline in the world. We are, redoing their safety cards and doing a lot of testing to make sure that people who have never flown on an aircraft before understand them,
Right.
all the way to the business flyer who flies multiple times a week, getting a good capture of a real test for those individuals that would represent a flight full of passengers.
Cool.
Not sure I answered your
Trying to work out. Yeah, I'm trying to work out who's the last airline.
I believe the largest airline in the world is American Airlines. Yes.
Oh, that's very good. Very good. So, so what do other people do then? If they're not using you, are they just sort of doing these things themselves? Is that what's going on, or are there other people out there?
There are other companies that do this out there. There are very few, and none that do the testing that we do. They're mainly just design firms that, graphic design firms who will lay something out per what's the requirement, but not necessarily tested for comprehension. We're the only company in the world that does that. And sometimes the carriers themselves, their design teams will design them internally.
Yeah. And with the best will in the world, I mean, no disrespect to them, but with your experience, you're going to know. I mean, some of the things that blew my mind when you were doing your talk, and I don't know if we'll be able to do this, verbally here, but some of the little thick tips along the way that you've worked out in terms of the size of lines and certain colors, and it's just mind blowing.
It's interesting. We were working on a project recently, and all we did was add one additional line to the illustration, and we tested it again, and it increased the understandability by 6%, which doesn't necessarily seem like a lot, but our minimum is 90%. It needs to be understood by 90% of those tested. And at 6%, by adding one small line to a sequence, it is really fascinating to get into the minds of humanity, right? Get into of people of all different cultures, races, genders, all over the world. And some regions understand things and comprehend things differently than we do, right? Than I do, than you do, than, anywhere.
Yeah.
So you have to be intentional about really reaching your audience and doing it well when you're doing it with something that has the opportunity to save your life. Colors make us feel a certain way. Red causes us to stop and pause. Green is a color that in most cultures means go and motion. So there's blues or calming, which is always good. A lot of interiors of aircrafts choose blues.
Yes.
So all sorts of colors and things that make a difference and small differences, big differences on whether the safety card is good or not.
That's just mind blowing, isn't it? So how do we know your work then? If people are listening, what airlines do they need to fly to test your safety cards out? They can go, I know the person behind this.
There are carriers all over the world that we have partnered with. So depending on, I'm assuming that your audience is global.
They are. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, American Airlines, United Airlines, we've partnered with Lufthansa and British Airways. I could go on and on. Ethiopian, Royal Air Morocco, Egypt Air, Gulf Air, Kuwait. I could go
Yeah.
Air Canada, WestJet, all sorts of amazing companies. But we also do, private aircraft. Here in the States, we just had an election, and both parties, we did their private aircraft that were carrying them as they were in the middle of their campaigns. We've done, going back to maybe the 60s and 70s, we did things like Led Zeppelin's private plane. So we do small aircraft and large aircraft. We did Ariana Grande's tours aircraft. It's a weird thing. You
Keep dropping the names with airlines.
Yes. So in that sense, it's really fun to look at the smaller aircraft, the Phantoms and the Learjets, and all the way up to the A380s.
Gosh,
Yeah.
you truly are global. The stuff. So how do they find you? They sort of think, oh, we need some safety cards. This is what we sort of like. Is it all reputation now? Is it kind of word of mouth?
It's different now than it was when I started, right? In the 90s, mid 90s and 1995, and even up into the early 2000s, it really was all reputation.
Yeah.
And we have a great reputation for being high quality and great service, and also provide the integrity of our what we produce is like no other. So back then it was a lot of partnerships. I serve on a few different committees that make regulatory requirements, and have partnered with things like the SAE to write the requirements that lead to the FAA advisory circulars. And the founders themselves in the late 70s, early 80s, testified before the United States Congress and saying that these cards need to be on the aircraft because we need to educate passengers.
Yeah.
So it became a law in the US, and then it became a law and a requirement all over the world. And they testified before Congress because of the Tenerife accident between Pan Am and KLM. It's still the worst aviation accident in history.
Yeah.
And the aircraft that had safety cards on them at the time, which happened to be ours, had a much, much, much higher rate of survivors than the one that didn't. So again, it was a real incident that changed the culture of educating passengers.
Yeah.
So they used to find us through word of mouth and relationship and reputation. A lot of companies now do what we do when we're looking for a brand new pair of shoes. We Google it. So they Google us, or they search us out and find our website, which is safetycards.com. So plural. So please visit it and check us out and say hello. Yeah.
Safetycards.com. Just getting that is pretty remarkable, isn't it? You must have been ahead of the pack on that one.
They, it says a lot about who we are and how long we've been around, that's Yes, our site name. And thankfully, the founders hired a young 19, 20-year-old who was a little more in touch with technology at that time than maybe they were.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted the same we said no, but so one of the things I thought was really interesting was um over time I am interested in the video bit as well. So if I can, I would like to ask you about that. But
Sure.
look at a safety card. What's you've got an order of things and all the safety demos tend to be in a similar order. And the safety card, when you look at them, you can kind of see there's a sort of a logic to them, but sort of so to reverse engineer it, how do you decide what goes where and how big it is and and all that sort of stuff? Yeah. I mean,
Right.
I'm sure it's a huge question probably, but
It is, but it isn't. I think people think it's probably larger than it really is. And if you are not experienced, I'm sure it could be overwhelming.
Hmm,
Interesting tidbit is the safety card in the seat back pocket has to be viewable to the passenger. When you onboard the aircraft, when you sit in your seat, you have to be able to identify the safety card immediately.
so it has to be bigger than the seat. That's bigger
Or
than the pocket.
correct. So it should have at least a peekaboo that tells you that that's the safety card. It should be in front of any other documents in the seat back pocket,
Right.
and it should ideally not be damaged through any tray tables or anything like that. So how large the card is in height
Hmm,
has a lot to do with the seat back pocket and tray table on board that aircraft. So that's the measurements.
that's interesting.
Yeah. Different governing agencies. So, in different regions of the world, they require different things on their safety cards. Some require the same things. So, like how to operate any doors or hatches on board the aircraft will always be on the safety card. Where you can find life jackets and how to put them on will always be on the safety card. But different governing agencies, Transport Canada, FAA, all of those, EASA, all of those organizations require CAA, different minimum requirements. So we as a team, depending on where you call us from, let's say you're calling us from Korea and you're saying we want to start a project for creating new safety cards. Well, because we have been doing this so long and we have all of those resources, we know exactly what's required
Right.
on the safety card there. So that sometimes determines what the sizing is and what the content is. And then all we need at that point is aircraft, what type of life jacket you have, because they're not all the same. You hear me, everybody? They're not all the same.
All right, we get it.
Yeah, I got it. So what type of equipment is on board? And then we, based on our experience, lay it out in a way that is the most understandable,
Hmm,
which is intentional.
yeah.
Which sequences are where they are at on the safety card makes a difference to increasing understandability. So
Like
just putting
you wouldn't think about it, wouldn't you? But so if you were to take a typical card, then what must be at the top, and then what's the sort of the things that have to be? So generally speaking, what's the order?
So what we like to do is to create cards that have some of the most common incidents on board the aircraft. So you should have quick access to how to fasten your seatbelt and how to operate the seatbelt on your aircraft. You should have quick access to what to do in the case of, losing decompression. So like needing oxygen. Some of the things that are the frequent incidences that are not necessarily life and death, but are more common. We'd like to keep those towards the top.
Right.
And then door operation, hatch operation, and hatch means it's like over the wing. It's a hatch smaller than a floor level top down door. Putting those together making sure all of your overwater equipment is put together is important to comprehension. So that's how we start.
So, and then, so from the moment you sort of take the first phone call to having it out there on the aircraft, what's that sort of timeline?
Well, it really depends on the size of the carrier. So we had a small carrier with a Challenger aircraft call us on Monday. And we are also a full commercial printing company in partnership with the design and aviation firm side of our organization. I developed a commercial printing company at the same time when I took ownership of the company as a whole, because it was our biggest pain. And we needed to be able to control timelines and quality and things like that. So on Monday, we had a Challenger 604, a safety card that we were being developed, and they were on board the airplanes yesterday.
No way.
Yes. That's, sometimes we get those phone calls where they are carriers under inspection and realized that the safety card that came with their aircraft is not accurate, and they need to update it or it's not effective.
How can you turn it around that quickly? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, for my art department, the head of my art department has been with me for over 20 years. And so he knows aircraft as well as I know aircraft, and manages the team, the art department, really effectively and beautifully. We have what we refer to as our house artwork. So think of it as having every sequence imaginable and every piece of equipment on board an airplane imaginable already illustrated.
Right.
And it's in pieces. And it's like putting the pieces together to custom design what matches your particular aircraft.
But what about then if you get, some, I don't know who signs these things off. Imagine the CEO gets to look at it and goes, "Oh, I don't like that color there. I don't like that funny little icon." And you're thinking, well, based on your research, that's better than what you want. How do you manage that?
Honestly, Paul, it's one of the toughest parts of my job to, there is a balance between making our partners' preferences a priority and making the effectiveness of the comprehension and understandability of the card a priority. So in that particular instance, what we would do, and it happens all the time. Yes. Well, because there's, especially in larger carriers, you have stakeholders from engineering, you have stakeholders from the in-flight departments, you have stakeholders from the marketing teams. So to really bring all of those teams together, data doesn't lie. And that's where we will bring all of the data to that conversation. And then ultimately they decide based on the data what their priority is. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they choose the effectiveness of it.
Yeah.
But we do have 5 different styles of artwork. And hopefully you find one that matches really the look and the feel of your particular carrier. And of course, we custom design all of the covers and things like that to be very specific to the carrier.
Okay. All right. That's a good answer. I did wonder if that was because, in my world, when I go in and do proposals for things, nearly always, for as many people you've got there, you've got all their opinions. And obviously the highest paid person in the room's opinion carries more weight. And I just thought that's the sort of people you're dealing with. I wondered. You have a very sort of gracious, calm way about you. I don't know if this is what you like all the time, but you don't seem particularly ruffled by anything. So I can imagine that must be quite helpful when you've got people going, I don't like that line there,
Well, first of all, you might want to interview my 17-year-old and my 11-year-old to find out
No,
if I'm ruffled.
no,
But
let's not burst the bubble.
let's not burst the bubble. Yeah. No, I mean, this sounds like kind of I don't even know what the word I would use to describe it, a weird statement, but if you work for an airline or if you're me, you are the worst person to say if the card is effective or not because you're too educated.
Yeah.
So if we create cards based on safety cards and videos and things like that based on our opinions of what makes sense, our opinions should be disqualified immediately because we don't represent the average flying passenger. We have touched hundreds of life jackets. We have donned them so many times, donning mean putting them on. We've put them on so many times in our lifetime. We have opened exit after exit after hatch after hatch. We have touched all of this equipment that 99.9% of the flying public will never experience.
Yes.
So we have to, thankfully, yes. So we have to come at it from the perspective of we are driven by all of the data that represents the group of people that need the information the most.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes a tough dynamic to get across to people who are really educated to understand. It almost seems counterintuitive.
Yes.
Right? Like, well, we know because we know this equipment. We know what works and we know. And I'm like, you're exactly right. You do know. And you don't represent the unfamiliar passenger.
No.
So.
No, well, that makes sense. And I guess that's quite a persuasive way to look at it. So what about the transition? I mean, not transition, but you also do the video side as well. So how did that come about?
We were working with a company, Chrysler Corporation, which was a auto manufacturing company here in the States.
Yeah.
Years ago. They still exist, but we were in Worcester still.
I used to own one. I love.
Okay. All right.
Nice vehicle, yeah. Those big, the big 7 seats and things. Yeah, man.
Back in the day, they were really, really big vehicles and not European friendly, I don't think. But and Chrysler Company, we had created a training program, which the founders, the company also did, a training program to educate what at that time was referred to as high value passengers who were flying company owned aircraft.
Right.
So that would represent like the CEO of the company, the CFOs of the company, people who were flying on a regular basis and were flying these business jets all over the place to different meetings and different plants and things like that. We created a program to train and educate them on how to, in an instant or in an accident, prepare themselves and care for themselves. And so our founders came up with the idea of let's do a video that reminds them of the top 5 or 6 most important things to know in an incident or an accident. And let's put it on a video that's played every time they fly. And we have the old reel still like in our, you can pull it out and look at each little frame. And we have that out in our warehouse in our archive section. And so we created the first ever passenger safety briefing video for Chrysler Corporation.
Ooh.
And it went from there. And then we created videos for the Federal Aviation Administration. And then it went on and on and on. And we created videos all over the world for years. We stopped creating the videos about 23, 24 years ago. And we do consulting on the videos as far as the content and the understandability and how it should be framed and how it should be
Yeah.
done well. But we stopped producing them, filming them about just over 20 years ago.
That sounds like a new CEO decision, that does.
Yes, it was. Yes. Yes. But boy, are those classics of the originals really a snapshot of eras and time and styles and colors. And yeah, it's
Mm.
really,
So you've dropped that. Interesting.
yep.
So in terms of so when you get on board then and you see the videos and stuff, are you kind of, you must be evaluating all the time, thinking, well, I wouldn't do it like that, or what do you think about that idea of doing the videos versus the manual demo?
I think both are great. You know, our brains are created so differently. There's visual learners, there's tactile learners, there is audible learners, there's visual. I mean, so our brains, we are created so differently and yet so similarly as human beings, but we have different learning styles. There's experiential learners. So I think anything that supplements and educates is a wonderful thing. We're in a really interesting season of aviation where it's so safe to fly, as you know.
I do.
It's so safe to fly that oftentimes these days the videos have become very entertaining, which has really fruitful aspects to it as well, because people pay more attention, at least the first time. They pay more attention. So that's great. But at the same time, they're not as effective from a safety perspective. So that's a really interesting time that we're in right now. Really find that balance of grabbing attention while also being effective, and that push and pull. And I'm just about to do a LinkedIn post, hopefully today. If not, I'll do it early next week on a brand new video that came out, and just some thoughts on how it succeeded and how we could really move in a direction keeping our passengers' safety in mind.
Yeah. I've often been a little bit conflicted when I've watched them, because you're right, it's amusing, it makes you watch it. But then I've often thought, does that then downplay the importance of it? Because you're talking about your life, aren't you, really?
Mhm.
And I don't know what the answer is, by the way. It was just a sort of a thought that I've had when I've flown recently.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely know what the answer is either, Paul. I think that the only answer would be in testing them.
Hmm. So what's next for you, your company? Where you've obviously been quite creative in the way you've approached stuff.
Mm.
What's your next sort of, I don't know, I don't want you to give away company secrets, but where are you sort of heading?
We are in the process of, as is and has been the world, of really expanding technologically with our products
Mm.
and creating more custom individualized briefings. And so that's something in the next 3 years, I hope to launch. We're not really ready to announce it or talk about it yet, but that is an area that we're really developing. We're spending a lot more time also really working on and with the customer experience teams, which has been really great. Anything that challenges us and makes us better, I want to be a part of.
Mm.
And I think that whereas we used to solely work with the in-flight departments, and in-flight departments represent the individuals who most likely were crew members and have gone up into the regulatory, making sure overseeing training and overseeing product on board. And now a lot of carriers are bringing their customer experience teams into it. And that has been really good for us to think about not just how are customers understanding the content, but how are they experiencing their environment
Yeah.
and how that increases understandability. So when you are looking at a safety card, if you can recognize your environment, the colors, the textures, the all of that on the safety card, you will consume the information at a higher level.
Yes.
Another side note is just really, we've done this forever, but more intuitively and less intentionally. We've really become more intentional in the last decade about, diversity, equity, and inclusion on our safety cards. Because again, not only is that the right thing to do, but when you recognize someone that looks like you
Yeah.
in the safety card, you will read it for longer. Isn't that an interesting statistic?
Yes. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Really makes that affinity bias, isn't it? Yeah.
So those are things that we are working on. And I do think that there have been more opportunities for me to kind of speak and present and get out there and spread the word, which is something we're focused on again. And that's exciting as well.
It's two things you've prompted me to ask now, and I'm hoping I remember both of them. So let's. I've got to try and remember right. Okay, so I've got to try and remember this. My brain goes all over the place. So one of them is linked to your last comment, so about the D&I side of it, and then I was thinking about the cards and your material, how it's catered for sort of neurodivergence and also hidden disabilities, which obviously fear of flying falls under. And I just wonder what your thoughts are around those areas.
I think we could be better. I think that we as a company could understand, and we as a world can understand neurodivergent better than we do. And I think humanity is better at that now than we were in any previous era before us. But those pieces, I think we could be better. And whether that is adding a supplemental briefing for individuals who would like it. And, we already do Braille passenger safety briefing cards for the blind passenger. We do large format for sight impaired passengers. We, I think, could be better and potentially develop something for the passenger that wants even more in-depth information.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think it's one of those things that we're learning more and more, aren't we?
Yes.
And so the other thing that I was thinking about was about, the way that you could check in online and you used to have to go to the airport and then somebody would ask you those 3 questions. This has been out of your sign and you packed it yourself, those ones. And then they decided that actually they didn't need to ask you could tick a box on an app or do it online. And I wondered, is there any particular reason why the safety cards couldn't be preloaded? Like, so you get it before, or does it have to be on board because it's in because of the context and situational cues?
Going back to
No idea where that question came from. It just popped in my head, and I thought, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like I should hire you as a consultant for the next generation safety card in the next 3 years. So yes, there is.
Not very often speechless, but that was one of those.
Yes, that's what we're really moving towards. Custom, individualized, technologically advanced briefing because the number one of what I shouldn't say the number one because it kind of ebbs and flows and depending on the region. So many people don't read the safety card or watch the safety video other than the first time because they've seen it before and they've flown before. And most of the flying public is not really educated enough with the fact that every aircraft is different. And it might be different in small ways, or it might be different in large ways. Like your life jacket might be in a completely different compartment than it was on your other aircraft. It might be a completely different life jacket, even if you're flying the same airline. The door to the novice eye may look like the door that it was on, the 767, or that's an old airplane, but the 737 and the A321 might look similar, but has very different operational steps to it.
Yeah.
So to be able to custom a safety card for your seat, your equipment, your aircraft, your flying duration, all of those things, I think is probably the next step.
Understood. Okay. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh,
I was going to say, just for sort of people who listen to this and watch this will be, we're mainly talking to the 20%, as I've mentioned before, who have a fear of flying. But obviously it can be higher in some countries, they believe, but it's really hard to prove it because not everyone's going to admit to it.
yeah.
So let's just say, 25% of people roughly have fear of flying. And some of them will be avidly reading the safety card and others will not. That's, from your point of view, knowing what you know about safety and all the research and everything that you've done over the years, why should they absolutely read every single safety card when they get on board, no matter who they are, how often they fly?
How we react to stress, fight, flight, fawn, will determine our actions and our inaction. And the more that we can educate ourselves in advance and just simply walk through, here's what I need to do in this situation. Here's what I need to do in that scenario. Here's what might come up. And, everyone that I cross paths with, count your seats to your nearest 2 exits in front of you, behind you. So that when we are put in potentially a scenario of stress, small stress, medium stress, large stress, our brain can remember and rerun through what we had already just learned. It could be the difference between injury, no injury, loss of life, life saved. So to calibrate your brain and to educate your brain every time is important. Figure out where your life jacket is. Count the seats going forward, going back, because an exit might be blocked by debris. Look around you, know how to fasten your seatbelt, keep your seatbelt fastened, right? Because turbulence, I'm sure and I know I've listened to one, you've talked about turbulence before and how it's never caused an accident in the history of aviation, but it has caused injury, right? So know how to operate your oxygen mask so that when it drops down, you are behaviorally acting versus emotionally reacting.
Nice.
That would be my recommendation. And it really probably won't happen to you.
That's true.
But at least And again, with oxygen, something that people often don't know is that you really have 15 to 20 seconds to get the mask on before you could potentially lose consciousness. So just grab it, put it on, put it around, put it on the neighbor next to you. But
if you like them,
Yeah. Yes.
So Okay, one final question, then I'll let you go. No, because it's been great.
Yeah.
So when you started your journey into aviation hooked you because of something about aviation. So I'm curious, what has happened to you as a result of doing what you do? Like, so how does the work you do and all this stuff spill out into the rest of your life? Do you when you get in the car, are you like, right, everyone strap it? Are you really like hyper conscious safety, or are you fairly chilled when you're nodding? Yes.
I laugh because my poor daughters, my husband is an investigator for a living for the government, and I work in safety. So we now have a 17-year-old that's thinking about what's next. She's a senior in high school going to college, and both of us are kind of looking at each other going, this it's no longer our responsibility, or we got to back off from kind of keeping her safe, right? So yes, I do look at vehicles. I do look at environments. I do backwards think so that I can forward respond. So I am somebody who's thinking about scenarios and how to react in emergencies and incidences that are not 37,000 feet up in the air. And truthfully, our company does a lot of consulting and creating of products outside of the aviation industry for large security firms across the world, and educating how to respond in things like shootings and terrorism, and all the way down to CPR and riots and things like that. So we do a lot of work outside of the aviation industry these days as a result of what we've done. But yes, everywhere I go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I try and tell myself to chill out a lot.
It doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also that person on an airplane. If you ever sit next to me on an airplane, which is so funny because people always eventually say, what do you do for a living? And then when I share what I do for a living, boy, do they pull that safety card out and look at They probably didn't when they got on, but they look at it after but I am that person that,
Feedback. So they say, oh, I don't like that little figure there.
yes, sometimes we do. Yeah.
Really?
Yes. Um,
Listen, lady, the
that's
data
it.
doesn't lie,
Yeah. But I'm that person that's, looking at the people around me, figuring out who's going to be my partner and getting everybody out of the aircraft and who I need to take special care of. And some of that is because I've been through crew training a couple of times in my 30 years. But I'm that person.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a really strong message here about, you think people might look at the safety card and just think, oh, there's a bit of plastic there. People have drawn some stuff on and not really thought about how much work and brain work and thinking is gone into that. And that's remarkable. And the fact that what your message is about preparing yourself, so it's not like scaring yourself, it's preparing, so you can knowing what's within your control and doing that.
And hopefully the preparation can bring a little bit of peace, right? Hopefully in preparation, we're feeling just a little bit more in control
Yeah.
of how we can respond to what happens to us.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully that, I know for me, it does.
Mm.
Yep.
Well, Trisha, that was fabulous as always. Thank you very, very much for your time and your wisdom. And that was really, really interesting. So just name check how people can find you so that they can have a look, have a little bit of a nose around and look at some
Sure.
of the stuff that you do.
So the website is www.safetycards.com.
Yeah.
And it's probably old school to say www, right?
Safetycards.com. Well, you're talking to old school, so I don't know.
There you go. The company name is the Interaction Group, and my name is Trisha Ferguson, Trisha Ferguson. If we want to connect on LinkedIn, we post a lot of information there about safety-related policies and illustrations and education. So for anybody who wants more information on that, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Trisha. That was brilliant. Really, really helpful, really informative. And but in the UK, we say, your onions.
That's an idiom I've not heard before.
No, that means you're not very knowledgeable yet. She knows her onions. I've no idea where it's come from, but it's high praise. They'll just
Okay, I'll take it. I'll take it.
you slip it into a conversation today. So he really knows his onions, and they'll be like, "What on earth?"
We'll see if people just go with it or if they're like, what?
Yeah. Just say, well, it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been so much fun.
You too.